ahead. Thank you for joining us for the SPUR application panel. My name is Sarah Rhodes. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the spring and fall SPUR coordinator. I will be serving as the moderator for this session. Also assisting me with the moderation of this info session is Temple Byers, our summer SPUR coordinator and academic advisor. Temple, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. So excited to be here and to have everyone share all of the SPUR information. This is such an amazing program. I look forward to meeting the students in the office and supporting you all through this process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Temple. So to start us off, I would like by discussing the outline for today's information session before introducing our panel. As you can see, you have all been muted. This has been done to prevent background lag and noise from entering the session, as well as to prevent too many people from talking at once. In addition, please consider turning off your webcam to save bandwidth and prevent lag. After we introduce our panel and go through some basic information about the SPUR program, we'll be opening the chat feature as well as the Q&A. Temple and myself will be monitoring the questions, and we'll direct them to the panel in an orderly fashion. We expect all participants to abide by the UC Berkeley principles of community so that we can maintain a safe, caring, and humane environment, and we'll be removing individuals who violate these principles. Lastly, we will be recording the session and chat log. Now that we've gotten all the logistics out of the way, I would like to introduce our three panelists, Professor Yujin Chung, Abel Duarte, and Ulash Karos. Panelists, please introduce yourselves and share a little bit about yourself and your interaction with the SPUR program. We can start with Professor Yujin Chung and then go in alphabetical order.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. I'm glad to be here. Again, my name is Yujin Chung, and I'm an assistant professor in the Energy and Resources Group and the Department of Environmental Science and Policy Management. So I have a joint appointment in both. And my prior experience with SPUR is last semester was actually the first time working with the SPUR program. We had an opportunity to work with an undergraduate student, and I've also sponsored one of my graduate students' SPUR project as well. And so we had about 5 undergraduates working with me and my student and be involved in the lab.
Abel, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abel Duarte. I am a 5th-year PhD student, PhD candidate here at UC Berkeley in the microbiology program. And I'm looking to graduate by Christmas. So I'm really excited to get that PhD soon. And my experience with SPUR has been that I've actually mentored a number of SPUR students over the summers. And a lot of our SPUR students that come into our lab usually stay in our lab, and they become full members during their undergraduate, and some of them even after they graduate. And a lot of them tend to go off to graduate school right after the experience in my lab. So I feel like I have a good experience mentoring SPUR students as a graduate student and mentoring them in their process towards graduate school. Thank you.
Abel, can you also share which lab you're in?
Yeah, so I'm in Rachel Brem's lab in the plant and microbial department.
Great. Dules, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Ulash Karos, he, him. I'm a staff computational research scientist in Berkeley Lab, which is uphill from the campus. I'm a member of the Climate and Ecosystem Science Division in Berkeley Lab, and I'm a core member of the Dr. Owen Brody's group. And yeah, my background is in bioinformatics and computational biology. I have not so far worked. I only work so far with one SPUR student directly, but that's because I'm mostly computational. But I interacted quite a bit with. We had a lot of SPUR students, mostly in wet lab, with their end of the project generating data, and I work with them quite with them. So I have a lot of experience from that. But I have my primary experience with similar programs is from the SULI program, which is the summer internship program here in Berkeley Lab.
Great, thank you, Ulash. You're joining us from the Lawrence Berkeley lab, right?
Yes, that's correct. We are just uphill from the campus.
Great, amazing. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I want to start by giving a quick overview of the SPUR program. The Sponsored Projects for Undergraduate Research, a SPUR, as we like to call it, encourages faculty and undergraduate students in the Rausser College of Natural Resources to collaborate on research projects by providing grant support towards their joint project. The funding from this program is generously donated by Rausser College alumni. Students may participate in the SPUR program by applying to a faculty-initiated project or by creating their own student-initiated project. This panel will be highlighting how to navigate applying to faculty-initiated projects. Currently, students can submit their applications for up to 3 faculty-initiated projects between now and August 30th at 5 p.m. To apply, you'll need a resume, personal statement, and an unofficial transcript. Some SPUR projects also require an interview before selection. Please note, first semester freshmen are not eligible for fall SPUR cycles. However, incoming transfer students are. We have a couple questions that we're going to start off with, and I'm going to list them now so that you guys as the audience can start thinking about them. The Q&A feature is open so that you may also start submitting your questions as well. Our first question will be, what was your first experience with research and how have you built confidence within the field since? Second, we'll be asking, how can a student without prior research experience stand out in their SPUR application? And third, what does mentorship look like in your lab? Do SPUR students in your lab primarily work with faculty or postdocs or graduate students? I'm going to go ahead and start us off with question 1. What was your first experience with research and how have you built confidence in this field since? I will ask Professor Yujin Chung to start us off.
Sure. When you sent me this question, I was like, oh gosh, like I have to re-jog my memory. It's a long time ago. So when I'm just thinking about my own experience when I was an undergraduate student, I didn't really think I was going to be going into research, but I ended up taking on like internships and jobs here and there that involved different forms of research. So whether it was, so I was partly a journalism major, so I was doing some internships in media outlets. I was working in internships for nonprofits, some government organizations, and even after my college years, I worked part-time for a corporation doing kind of consumer market research. So I was doing research in very different formats in different types of institutions. And ultimately, I got into research in an academic setting. I had an opportunity to work with a few professors in maybe a 6 months gap that I had between finishing my undergraduate and going into doing my master's degree. And I think that really was eye-opening for me to see what research looks like working with a faculty member and doing kind of their own investigations into their own independent projects. And I guess to answer the second part of how have you built confidence within the field, I think the way I approached research, I guess I should say that I'm different from the other panelists in that I'm a social scientist. And so the college does have social scientists and humanities scholars working in different topics. And for me, I've always been drawn to the idea of investigation, grappling with theory, trying to unpack a research puzzle or paradox and problem in myriad dimensions, and trying to learn different methods and trying to identify patterns and contradictions in different types of data. So this idea of problem solving has always been a driver for me. And I think with research, I think the best way to go about learning and building confidence is to engage yourself in research. So I think SPUR is a really great opportunity to do that. And especially in my field in humanistic social sciences, I think you learn best initially about research by reading good pieces of research. And so I would really encourage students, both undergraduate, master's, and PhD students, to read literature in depth and to read about how authors and scholars are going about their own investigative process. And as I've kind of progressed into my doctorate and to faculty position, I think I'm always learning, as someone who does in-depth ethnographic qualitative work, I'm always talking to people on the ground. And you learn so much by doing that, engaging with people on the ground to make not only think theoretically in your head about a particular problem, but how such problems are lived and experienced on the ground. And so I would say you will continue to build confidence and build experience as you expand your exposure opportunities, whether it's through SPUR or through other research opportunities.
I think I'm next. Great. Can you ask the first part of the question? I just want to make sure I'm like answering it correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. The first part of the question, I'll just read the whole question again. What was your first experience with research, and how have you built confidence within the field since?
Got it. Okay, yeah. So I told everyone I'm about to end my PhD, and so my first experience was as an undergraduate, and I was definitely stuck at some point studying science and what I'm doing now, but I wasn't actually doing it. I was just like in classes and things, but I wanted to get into it, but I had no experience. And I got to say, like I get this question a lot, and I think it's just I think I was literally like banging on the door of a professor's door, like in the hall. And he opened the door, and I just said that I wanted to be, you know, a microbiologist, and I had no experience, and that I know he has a lab, and if I could literally get in there to do anything he wanted, like, you know, like to wash dishes or whatever. And that's kind of like what it started off, kind of like this whole like exposure that our previous panelist was just talking about. It's really like you got to get in. And for science, for example, science right now, especially let's say in the biological sciences, is so broad and big that you really just got to get into some level of research to be exposed, so you could take kind of like a path from there. And so in my world, that path was I was like studying environmental microbiology. So I was like studying microbes that release like toxins and was killing like the wildlife and fish around the environment. And so we were trying to discover what genes those microbes use to make those toxins. And it was just kind of like eye-opening how like such a practical, simple, but largely impactful project could like expand me to like molecular tools. And that was kind of like my first start, where I was doing like basic laboratory research. And then I expanded to what was possible in the lab, like molecular tools and things like that. And from that interest, actually, I decided not to go to my PhD after college. I actually spent 5 years in biotech industry, doing different things, working for therapeutics, building DNA for different companies, and designing different DNA for other companies. And through all that, I kind of got exposure to like what you could do with genetics. And that kind of led me back to Berkeley. So it's really just getting exposed and saying, wow, look at this. All that from in my story, look at what molecular biology has to offer. It's like endless. You might focus on viruses or cancer, or you might not even touch the lab and be doing like analysis, you know, on that stuff. So that's kind of how I got started. And I think one opportunity kind of led to the next, but I always look to jump into an opportunity that offered me the most amount of options in the future. And so that's kind of how I kind of got started with that. And it led me to where I was today. And like I said, every opportunity will lead to more confidence, because your next opportunity is like, wow, look at all this science I can do now. What can I do with this? And it'll just kind of continue building your confidence. Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead, Ulash.
Yeah, so wow, it's been a while, but I think yeah, definitely my first research experience was in my junior year, third year in college, and I actually have a background in electrical engineering, so I switched to biology later. So I knew that I didn't want to practice engineering. I didn't end up liking engineering too much, and I was looking for switching to more biology, but quantitative biology. So you know, I read how I can do that with my skills, and I figured that knowing a technical lithography that's used to print electronic chips that has an application back then in DNA microarrays, and I just banked to the, I emailed many professors across the world actually that, that I want to apply skills that I have to that, like specifically. And a professor from Johns Hopkins Medical School took me, and then that was my first research experience in a very pretty different environment in medical school / biomedical engineering. And that definitely gave me the confidence into what I want to do for my PhD, which then I switched to computational biology for my PhD, and that gave me a clear idea on how that fits, my skill fits into the PhD work. And what I learned, the main thing I remember I learned from that research experiences was to see how my little project fit into the larger picture of the larger project, and which ended up, my little piece ending up in a publication, like in a bigger publication, which in our field is usually there are a lot of people involved in a publication. That was very satisfying and built a lot of confidence to see that.
Great, thank you, Ulash. So we'll go ahead and move on to our second question, which is, how can a student without prior research experience stand out in their SPUR application? And maybe we can go backwards, and we'll start with Ulash again.
Yeah, this might not apply broadly, but in my case, it's I did find that the coursework is somewhat important, and the reason is we get a lot of students from Nature Resources College, and not all of them are interested in doing computational science, which is what I'm doing. So those skills are quite important. Not that they can only be gained through coursework, but it requires some stamina from the applicant to to hassle around and try to solve problems. So that's typically what I'm trying to get at. It's not a must that you must have the coursework, but the willingness to learn. And yeah, I think that's important. So sometimes that leads to maybe unusually me picking students in their fourth year because they have that kind of coursework accumulated in their fourth year.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I've heard my PI actually say, hey, I just, read this SPUR application paragraph from the student, and I was like super impressed. And so I think that when you apply to the SPUR, you sometimes apply to a specific group, a specific lab. And if you have a component in there that you have to write to them, like in your application, I think that some professors actually do read them, or the people that decide do read them. And that's an opportunity, in my opinion, to look at the research and say, wow, I want to do the research and I'm going to speak to that in this application. I think that's a great way to stand out. And in fact, that's what happened to one of our last students. And she was selected literally because my professor was so impressed with what she wrote inside the application. Because I'm sure like everybody, all the people here, like everybody has excellent grades. But sometimes like connecting a little closer to what they're doing, what you want to do, and making them merge right there really might help you stand out, that you really want to work in that specific group.
I'll build on what Ulash and Abel has said. I think the first thing for me is to demonstrate your willingness to take initiatives and learn. And the second one is to demonstrate excitement and enthusiasm and curiosity about the particular project. And I say this because I've seen because students can apply to multiple projects at a time, some people actually don't spend enough time tailoring their application to particular projects. And so if you could as much as you can, tailor your excitement and interest in your application. That would be great. And third, I'd emphasize trying to, if it's your first time doing kind of academic research, try to highlight what kind of theories or concepts or methods you encountered in class and that you think resonates with the kind of work that you'll be doing. And it could be the things that you've learned from your class, but also maybe some other extracurricular activities that you've done that resonates with this particular topic. And finally, I like to look for whether the students think or whether and how they think the research project could help with their future plans. And so if I have maybe 20 applications and I see one student who has had no prior experience, but is really elaborate in the way they talk about how this particular SPUR research could help propel, say, their thesis or the kind of the research careers they want to get into. So I take that into account. So even if they don't have research exposure and experience before, if they can articulate how they think this opportunity could help them in the future, that'd be really great.
Great. So just to summarize some of the things that you all talked about, mentioning coursework that you've taken that relates to the project is really helpful. Showing enthusiasm towards the project in your personal statement, tailoring each personal statement to the different projects you're applying to, and really diving deep into like why this project is what you're applying for, including how you hope to use the knowledge and skills that you gain in the project towards your future. We also kind of touched a little bit on like when don't have prior experience, talking about the maybe how some of the work experience that you have or the coursework that you've taken or the internships or leadership experience that you've had can be applied and you have transferable skills that can be used towards that project. Great. Thank you, everyone. Now for our third question, what does mentorship look like in your lab? Do SPUR students in your lab primarily work with the faculty, postdocs, or graduate students? And I think we will start us off with Abel.
Yeah, thank you. In our lab, we're a functional genomics lab, and I guess I would argue that most of our members in our lab would say that they do 50% computational work and 50% wet lab work, and pretty down split in the middle, which is great because that kind of lends itself to a lot of like working together on a lot of things. From my lab specifically, my PI, Rachel Brown, she's very hands-on. So you're likely to meet with me, the person training you in the lab, as much as you're likely to meet with her. And that's working on documents or working on your honors thesis later on or whatever. So yeah, it's pretty hands-on. You get to work with kind of everybody in a good spread out environment.
Ulash, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so in our group, which is a microbial genomics group / environmental sciences. So we do field work, wet lab work, and computational work. So the interaction is primarily with postdocs and senior scientists, staff scientists like myself. So usually the students are expected to attend the group meetings if it fits their schedule, and then present their research, or it might be the research that they did before. It might be even if they don't have results yet, it might be their projects on how it fits to other people's work. Yeah, we do regular check-ins, usually like fitting into the student's schedule. What I did find particularly useful is as Eugene said, how this project, like the particular project, fits into what the student wants to do. So sometimes they are thinking of it more than a semester, which changes the dynamics of the work that's going to be done.
So the question was about mentoring students in the lab. So I direct a research group called Critical Realities Lab, And it's a lab where mostly graduate students, PhD students conduct empirically grounded and justice-oriented research and development in socio-environmental change in various rural settings across the globe. So I have students I'm working in East Africa, I have other students working in Latin America, South Asia, and North America. And we meet every 2 weeks to discuss our works in progress and different topics of interest. Because in the humanities and social sciences, we have work in such that we individually do our independent research. And so it could be different from the other kind of wet lab structures that you see in the natural and physical sciences. So for the students that I'll be mentoring for the SPUR lab, for SPUR project, I'll be meeting with them one-on-one every 2 weeks and communicating over email. And they are also invited to attend our regular lab meetings to get an exposure into what a graduate social science lab looks like. Should they, want to go into academic careers from their master's or their PhD. And I also make an effort to have students outline their expectations for the semester. And so that we can check in during the semester and also at the end of the semester to see if their goals have also been met, in addition to them assisting with my own work.
Great, thank you, panelists. So I will go ahead and open us up to our questions from the audience. Very exciting. So I'll go ahead and read them out loud, and then panelists, feel free to answer. Or I can also direct it to you if we need a little bit of a push. But I'll go ahead and start off with our first one, which is, how competitive is the SPUR program? How many applications are there, or how many applicants are there in relation to the number of positions available? So I can talk about my experience with this as a SPUR coordinator, and then I'll pass it off to you guys. So right now, we have 83 positions for the SPUR program. I've seen as many as like 115 students get positions at once, because some labs will sponsor, like 7 students or 10 students, and then other labs will stick to the 2 that they originally asked for. SPUR is quite competitive. We often get hundreds and hundreds of applications. So as we said, it is important to tailor yours to your personal statement. And then I also encourage you guys to always apply for 3 SPUR projects. You can apply to up to 3. And then we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I also encourage you to apply to 3 UREP projects so that you can, really put as many, lottery tickets in the bowl as possible. I think I will pass it over maybe to Abel. Could you talk about how competitive it is to get a position in the BREM lab?
I honestly do not have that type of scope, to be honest. I just hey, this is this person, she's new in our lab, they're already in. I would say that the PI in my lab is very much the gatekeeper of who gets accepted into SPUR, and that's why she really reads those statements to see if they're interested in the research. So I don't know, I'm learning for the first time how many people apply and stuff, so I'm not a good person to ask how competitive it is. Sorry.
It's okay. Maybe we'll ask Eugen to jump in here.
I'll just based on what it was like last year. And so I have a project, one of my graduate students in the lab have a project. So we're each selecting 1 student. I don't know the exact numbers on top of my head, but I think we might have gotten somewhere around, 20-25 in total applications. And then we selected 2 out of them. So that gives you a sense.
Okay, great. Ulash, do you have anything to add, or would you like me to move on to the next question?
Yeah, you can move on.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we have a question from a transfer student. So when referencing STEM courses taken at community college prior to transfer, would it be a good idea to include those in my application materials?
I would say yes. I've definitely mentored students here at Berkeley, let's say in chemistry, who came from a community college, did pretty good chemistry there at the community college, got good grades, took the organic chemistry, the stuff that inspired them into chemistry, came here, did research, and now, they're at a PhD program. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. From that transition from, let's say, community college to a lab here at Berkeley, it's kind of like what you got, right? That maybe you did some kind of chemistry or some other discipline at the community college. So yeah, don't sell that short. That is very valuable in getting your research.
Yeah, I agree with Abel that was my experience too. If the student can articulate how the coursework fits into the specific project, that's usually a good sign. And I had one case like that turned out pretty well.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have another question that is it common for a student to base their undergraduate thesis off of a faculty-initiated SPUR project? If that is your intention to do your own research project, should it be brought up while applying or later on?
Can I clarify, like, when you say thesis project, is this like an honors thesis, or what is this exactly for? What?
Yeah, so there are different ways students can do a thesis. Most will do an honors project thesis, which are available to CNR students with a 3.6 or higher GPA. But there are also non-honors thesis options. And then there are also student-initiated SPUR projects, which can then later on turn into a thesis if they decide to.
Yeah, I have experience with the honors thesis and basically doing research in our lab, whether it's for a summer or like a year, and using that whatever research you have done in our lab, that you can use it as an honors thesis. Yeah, absolutely. You definitely can. And a lot of the time, what your honors thesis ends up being might not be what you thought, because the research changes sometimes, So it's, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen that before, just in my case, but I would imagine, if they find the project, you wouldn't be doing the exact same thing for your honors thesis, but a component of that, or some thread of that, I can see that being formed into a thesis, as long as it's original, right? So it's not replicating the work you did, but building off on what you've done.
Great, thank you. We have another question asking, for disabled students or students in the disabled students program, would it be preferable to mention that in their personal statement or application?
I think it's up to the applicant to share. I think whatever's most comfortable there to share. Obviously, like, their interest and their passion is what's being taken into consideration, but that is also important. And if they're mentioning and willing to share information, I think that's definitely should be taken into consideration, and that's important.
Yeah, I can also add that, for our personal statement prompt, there are a couple questions. One of them is present a compelling image of yourself as a person and your potential success as a member of the RCNR research community. Another prompt that we ask is highlight your understanding of or experiences with a non-traditional educational background or groups that have been historically underrepresented in research. So I think this definitely speaks to, like Abel said, mention what you're comfortable talking about. But I think that, if this is an important part of your identity and something that you've, learned to work with, right? It's important to share that if you feel comfortable with it. We added these prompts to the personal statement because we want you guys to be honest about who you are and the things that you've overcome. It's part of your educational journey and what's led you to a research institution. So yes, I encourage you to share as much as you feel comfortable with, and to allow the professors to gain the best understanding of who you are as a person. Great. I can go ahead and ask another question. Can I add a letter of recommendation to my application? So I'll go ahead and answer that. So the application should be your resume, your personal statement, and your transcript. There is no need or space to also provide a letter of recommendation. And I recommend saving that letter of recommendation for a job or grad school or something like that. But we don't expect or encourage letters of recommendation to be included. Okay, I have another question. If you have taken a class with a professor leading the project, is it relevant to talk about that in your personal statement if you're excited about their research? Eugen, you've taught classes. Do you want to share about that?
Sorry, I was scrolling to find the question. Could you repeat the question? Oh, you're muted, Sarah.
If you've taken a class with a professor who's leading the SPUR project, can you reference that in your personal statement? And is it relevant to the research?
Yeah, I mean, if you've taken a course and what you learned from it and why you felt inspired after taking this class to apply for the SPUR project, then yeah, I think you should definitely mention that.
I agree. A lot of our SPUR students were, they come in saying, yeah, we met, RPI in our class, and that kind of sparked the interest in the conversation.
Yeah, same here. We had a lot of students being interested in our projects through exposure to the latest research in the course that our PI is giving.
Great, thank you all. On average, how many hours a week is a SPUR position per student?
It's a range for us. I would argue it really depends on the student's enthusiasm, actually. It really does. If you want to be in the lab and learn how to purify nucleic acids or make proteins and you want to learn that process and it takes 5 hours a week, that's cool. If you want to take ownership of an independent research project and maybe even analyze some data, and you want to spend 15, 20 hours a week doing that, and you have room for that in your undergraduate education, then yeah, there's room for that as well. So in our group, it really depends on your enthusiasm. There's room for exploring that if you want to do particular science, if it's a skill set, if it's a project that you want.
I think on my application, on my project, I think I say 9 to 12, plus minus. I think that's when I work with students, I'm kind of attentive to their own schedule. I know our students take multiple classes and have, full-time, part-time jobs. And so I want to be attentive to students' needs as well as kind of the work that needs to get done for the project. And so we do meet frequently to kind of make changes as needed per week to play around and be flexible.
And I think in general, it depends on the lab. Some of them will list how many hours is expected on their project posting. So like Eugen mentioned, 9 to 12. Some are, looking for a lot less in terms of hour commitments and are just asking for 3 to 6 hours. For every 3 hours, it equals 1 unit. So you have to think about, how many units are you taking? How much time in a day is there? How do you also balance self-care in with that as well? Taking on what you are capable of doing while, also taking care of yourself. Okay, I have another question. Do you have any tips for someone with dry lab experience trying to transition to a wet lab?
yeah, usually students want to know the other way around. So I don't have experience with this one.
Yeah, so I mean, all I could say is I came from a very much a wet lab experience, and when I came to grad school, I wanted at least my project to have a component of computational genomics, functional genomics in the project. And so when I was choosing a research group, I definitely chose a lab that it was almost like a trade that like I would, I'm excellent experimentally, so I could trade that in for experience analyzing genomic data. And so my experience usually is it's more of they say it is usually the other way around, where you want like a wet lab person like me, that's my example, wants more computational experience. But if you're going from but because I work with people that typically do both, I would say that if you have a strong computational background, that's a big advantage, really. And learning biology and getting, let's say a year of lab experience is probably going to really give you good experience to do whatever you want to do next, because it really connects what you're doing on the computer to what you're doing in the lab. When you have that kind of knowledge, it really brings it together. So I would say like usually you're at an advantage if you have dry lab experience and you want wet lab experience. So I would say usually you're offering up saying like, I know how to do RNA-seq analysis, and someone might be studying, mammalian cells or studying yeast genetics or something, and that's an opportunity for you to learn how to do molecular work or whatever you're interested in doing. But my experience has been, how can you do it? It's you offer up that one skill you do have in exchange for an opportunity to learn something else. And in my experience, that angle is usually pretty welcomed, if you know that's what you want.
Eugen, maybe you could share how a student would do the opposite. Like I know you do like a dry lab, obviously research, and so maybe like if a student has a lot of like wet lab or like very like STEM focused research experience or STEM focused coursework, how can they then make themselves a viable candidate for your research?
So kind of the reverse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've had applications like that before, but if that were to come up, I would reiterate what I mentioned before. Whatever experience you have is experience. And as long as you can articulate what you learned from that experience, what kind of skills you use in that experience, and how that skill could be transferred in a different context. And again, being enthusiastic and curious about the dry lab project that you're going to be involved in. So that would be my advice.
Great, thank you. We have another question. If you haven't had the best grades or best GPA over your undergrad years, does that decrease your chances of getting accepted? If so, how can you still present yourself as a good candidate?
I think there's usually some reason or multiple reasons why the grades are as superb in one semester to another. And if there's particular circumstances that the applicant would like to address in their application, they could certainly do that. And they can also highlight, what apart from grades, they can actually point out, whether it's, extracurricular activities that they've done that relate to the project, or internships or other things. And so it could be a minus, but not entirely, as long as, the applicant can be holistic about what they could bring to the project.
Yeah, so I mean, I am of the belief that grades aren't everything, and that when at the end of the day, when people get their role, get the position, it's not because someone was like, "Oh man, they got the B, or the B plus or the A minus, whatever it may be," and it's not quite the A that this other person got. I think at the end of the day, when they're you're applying for a lab in any field, they're going to be more excited about hearing about why you want to join them than your qualifications to join them, you know? Same with a job, right? Like everybody that's probably going to get interviewed is probably qualified actually. So at the end of the day, if they're all qualified, who do they choose? You know, well, they're probably going to choose someone that they like more for a reason. Maybe they have a particular skill set or something like that. And so again, like kind of we've been saying here in this panel, like highlight that in some way. Highlight that in the writing, highlight that in your enthusiasm. Reach out to the professor cold, you know, and just say, can we meet so like we can talk about this? I mean, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to say no, right? Or they don't have time. So you're just right at the same spot that you were. So I say try to display that enthusiasm, and it's just like the concern of grades, like is never even mentioned, you know. So don't let it bog you down too much.
Ulash, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I think it really helps to meet the professor researcher and explain and show your interest. I think one thing I found interesting that some students who didn't have the best grades, but they went through one of our papers and trying to reproduce the results, and they really know about the type of research we do, and that was very useful and great to see, like trying to actually, like having actually put the effort into the specific work that you're going to do. So research is not equal coursework, and some students already know that by the time they apply. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And again, I'd like to highlight that the prompts for the personal statement leave that space for you to talk about the experiences that you've had, you know, while at Berkeley. Share the, you know, things that you've overcome, what you learned from those experiences, and how you're moving forward in your life, and how this research project can like elevate your experience as a Berkeley student. And then you can also elevate the lab's experience having you on their program. Another question we have is, what is the difference between URAP and SPUR? If the project I'm interested in is listed under both SPUR and URAP, which one should I apply to? Do any of our panelists have any experience with URAP?
We did have some URAP in our lab, but I don't know. I'm not in a position to describe the differences. Yeah.
I can talk about the differences between URAP and SPUR. So SPUR is for only Rausser College students. So LNS, chemistry, engineering, College of Environmental Design cannot apply to SPUR projects. This is just for you guys. And I also do lots of gatekeeping to make sure that only CNR students are sponsored for these positions. So URAP is campus-wide. So sometimes CNR professors will post both on URAP and on SPUR for their project. I would say as a CNR student, you're going to be competing with a smaller pool within SPUR, right? So it would be good to apply for those positions through SPUR, whereas maybe you want to apply to a URAP position that someone in the linguistics department is posting. That's what you should apply for the URAP projects on, for projects that are outside of our college. But again, like I said, it's great to apply to 3 projects for both so that you increase your chances of getting a research position. And I would also say, yeah, you don't probably want to like, you know, waste one of those applications applying for the same exact project, you know, that's listed on SPUR and URAP. You want to spread your application out. Okay, great. Do you guys have, we have a question here about how should we approach the personal statement? What are you looking for in that? I know we've talked a little bit about it, but maybe you could speak to like, how formal are you looking for a personal statement to be?
So the question is how long should the personal statement be?
How
in
long
general?
and how formal? What should they include?
Okay, yeah. I think length, it shouldn't be too long. I think you can encompass everything within 2 pages, is my perspective, or less. And what you want to do in your personal statement is obviously introduce yourself and who you are and what you're about. And then, another component should be like about the lab that you want to get into and talking about them. And then the last component should be how you guys make sense together. I think how I would format it, because that's how you would do it for a job, basically, where you would say like, hi, I'm this person. I'm super passionate about these things. I'm super interested in your work because, right? So now you've like introduced who you are, why you're so passionate about their work, and then close it up with why it makes sense, that you should have an opportunity, and that could be about what we've been talking about in this panel, like how this is going to help you, and not but don't focus too much on just how it helps you, but also why you want to do this work, like how this is going to be a stepping stone to doing this type of work potentially. So that would be my advice on the personal statement. It shouldn't be too long, but want to emphasize that merge.
In terms of the length, because some projects and some faculty and graduate students or postdocs could be going through a lot of applications, make it succinct, not too short, not too long, somewhere in between, just right. And it is an application, so do take it seriously. But for the personal statement, I think instead of giving us a laundry list of all the things that are really cool and exciting about you, I think you should be able to say, okay, I did X, Y, and Z, and this is how these were the formative experiences that led me to who I am today. Like doing that extra work, not only to list the things that you've done that are important to your life, but how they helped you become who you are, and how that will help, spur the facilitate kind of the progress and research in that particular SPUR project. So again, tailoring it to the project.
Okay, great. I just have a couple maybe like very like SPUR technical questions that I'm going to answer. So our applications collectively reviewed at the end of the application cycle, or our decisions rolling. So students have until August 30th at 5 p.m. to submit their applications for SPUR. Then the faculty will begin reviewing, and if interviews are required, they will reach out for interviews. Faculty then have between the 31st and the 12th to review, interview, and select all of their students. It's a big undertaking for them, but they do a great job. And the decisions are expected to be made by the 12th at 9 a.m. at the very latest. And then students have a little less than 48 hours to enroll in the classes. And then the ad drop deadline is September 13th at 11:59 p.m. So ideally, you're getting enrolled in those research units by the ad drop deadline. We recognize there's a quick turnaround. So if something happens, you can always reach out to myself, the SPUR coordinator, or our scheduler, and they can help you get enrolled in those units. You should also be having conversations with the faculty around like, how many hours do they want you to be doing, and therefore how many units should you be enrolling in? Okay, those were some of the last questions we had time for today. I want to give a huge thank you to our very, very wonderful panelists. I really appreciated all of your guys' insight today, and I know our students did as well. Students, thank you for attending. If you have any questions, you can always reach me at spur@berkeley.edu. And thank you for joining us all today. Good luck with the start of school next week, and good luck submitting your SPUR applications. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.